Meghan expected distance from the royal household, but nothing prepared her for the message that arrived without warning. Her name had not simply disappeared from one ceremonial dinner. A private instruction linked directly to Prince William had removed her from every future royal state banquet. No announcement had been made, no confrontation had taken place, and no explanation had reached her first. The decision was already active before Meghan even knew it existed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan read the communication again, slower this time, searching for anything that might soften it. There was none. A royal state banquet is a formal dinner hosted by the monarch for visiting heads of state, and an invitation carries more than social value. It signals trust, standing, and closeness to the crown. William had quietly authorized a standing palace instruction that barred her from every future banquet unless that order was formally reversed. Harry watched her face change before she spoke. She lowered the message onto the table, stared at him, and asked, "Everyone?" He did not answer immediately, and that silence struck harder than any explanation. Meghan pushed back her chair, walked away, then turned sharply. She wanted to know how long his brother had been planning this, why no one had spoken to either of them, and why a family fracture had been converted into permanent palace procedure. The wording made the decision even more painful. William had not blocked one appearance or one difficult evening. He had created a continuing protocol, meaning staff would apply it automatically without reopening the argument whenever another state visit was announced. Meghan understood the consequence at once. The monarchy had written a future in which her absence was already assumed. Charles had been informed, but the timing carried its sting. By the time the king absorbed how absolute the language was, William's office had already shaped the mechanism and moved it into the palace system. The monarch now faced a choice between undoing his son's decision or allowing it to harden into precedent, and neither path came without cost. Meghan's shock began turning into something colder. She no longer wanted to know only who approved the ban. She wanted to know why William believed such a drastic line had become necessary now. Harry knew the answer would take them back months, to one royal evening neither brother had forgotten. Because before anyone could understand why Meghan had been shut out, they had to understand what William believed he was protecting, and what Harry believed his brother had just destroyed. The banquet prohibition may have carried William's authority, but its emotional force came from a much older fracture. Behind the formal language stood two brothers who no longer interpreted each other's actions generously. William saw boundaries where Harry saw punishment. Meghan saw humiliation where the future king saw institutional protection. And Charles, caught between family and crown, understood that one ceremonial decision had suddenly reopened wounds the palace had spent years trying to contain. William felt that pressure most sharply when royal duty collided with family history. As Prince of Wales, the title given to the monarch's direct heir, he was expected to think beyond one dinner and consider how future diplomatic occasions might be affected by private conflict. State events were not simply family gatherings. They involved foreign leaders, government officials, and the image of the crown itself. For the prince, uncertainty had become a risk he no longer wanted to carry. Harry saw something entirely different. Every restriction involving Meghan seemed connected to years of tension, rejection, and the painful belief that his wife had never been treated fairly inside royal life. He did not hear protocol. He heard punishment. The harder William tried to separate institution from emotion, the more his brother believed the institution was being used to disguise emotion. William sat alone with the banquet papers before an evening meeting and stopped at an older guest document bearing Meghan's name. He stared at it longer than he intended, then closed the folder. When an aide entered, the future king spoke quietly. "We cannot keep doing this occasion by occasion." The words were controlled, but the decision behind them was not temporary. Charles had wanted another path. The king had privately hoped future participation could be considered case by case, allowing circumstances and relationships to change. He understood that flexibility might preserve some hope of reconciliation. Yet he also understood his elder son's fear that constant reconsideration would keep reopening the same wound before every major ceremony. Meghan felt the deepest cut when she understood what permanence truly meant. The ban did not only keep her away from one table, it created an official future in which palace planners could prepare major occasions without ever expecting her return. That realization left her quieter than anger had. Harry saw it too, and his resentment toward his brother hardened. But William had not reached that decision simply because relations were strained. Something specific had happened months earlier, something he believed proved uncertainty could no longer be tolerated. That event would become the point everyone later remembered differently. The night William stopped asking whether reconciliation was possible, and began asking whether the monarchy could afford it. Months before Meghan discovered the ban, there had been one evening inside the royal world that changed William's calculations. It was not a screaming confrontation or a public scandal. It was quieter and, for him, more consequential. A diplomatic reception ended with an exchange that left senior figures uneasy, Harry defensive, and William convinced that the next state occasion could become something far larger than a family disagreement. That was the moment the future king stopped hesitating. Meghan had arrived already carrying months of frustration. Palace planners were still keeping narrow ceremonial possibilities open for her and Harry, hoping carefully managed appearances might prevent total separation. A diplomatic reception, a formal gathering where members of the royal household meet foreign representatives and guests, was meant to prove that limited participation could still work. William had resisted permanent exclusions for that very reason. He feared one hard rule could turn every future invitation into another public battle. The tension sharpened when Meghan learned that her seating position had been changed without anyone consulting her directly. She confronted a senior household official and demanded to know who had made the decision. Harry joined her within moments, his anger rising when the explanation centered on protocol rather than personal courtesy. Meghan insisted the issue was not the chair itself. It was the pattern of decisions being made around her, while she was expected to accept them quietly. William arrived as the exchange became more heated. He listened long enough to understand the dispute, then asked Harry to step with him into an adjoining room. The prince closed the door and asked whether his brother truly believed the change had been designed to humiliate Meghan. Harry answered that intent no longer mattered when the same result kept happening. William argued that ceremonial order could not be rewritten every time someone felt slight. Harry's next words changed everything. He told his brother that Meghan would never again quietly accept decisions made around her. To him, it was a defense of his wife's dignity. To William, it sounded like a warning that future royal occasions might become battlegrounds whenever protocol clashed with personal expectation. The brothers left the room understanding each other less than when they entered. William returned to his papers later that night, with the argument still pressing against him. Beside a briefing line about future diplomatic hospitality, he wrote 5 words by hand. No uncertainty at state level. The note was private, but its meaning was brutal. Months later, those words would become the seed of the permanent banquet restriction. And when Meghan finally discovered what had grown from that sentence, she would not accept another explanation through staff or paperwork. The secret instruction had been born in private, but its consequences could not remain there forever, because Meghan wanted the explanation from the one person who had made the call. When Meghan finally faced William, the confrontation was colder than either side expected. There was no shouting at first. That made it worse. She wanted him to explain how a family disagreement had become a permanent royal prohibition. He wanted her to understand that state occasions were no longer places where unresolved personal conflict could be tested. Between them stood years of anger, mistrust, and one devastating fact. William had made the decision before offering her the conversation. Meghan had refused another explanation through Harry, advisors, or household correspondence. She wanted the answer from the man who had authorized the restriction. A royal state banquet is a formal dinner hosted by the monarch for visiting heads of state, and exclusion from every such event carried a message far beyond one missed evening. William agreed to meet because he knew a permanent rule could not remain hidden behind staff forever. Meghan entered first. William arrived moments later, closed the door, and stayed standing. She looked directly at him. "You barred me from one banquet?" the prince answered. "From state banquets." Her voice tightened. "All of them?" He did not soften it. "Yes." The silence that followed was sharper than shouting. Meghan told him the secrecy had turned protocol into humiliation. If the decision had truly been institutional, she argued, he could have said it to her face before the order was placed into palace procedure. William answered that earlier attempts to manage sensitive appearances, informally, had ended in accusation, mistrust, and renewed conflict. He insisted that state occasions could not become testing grounds for unresolved family battles. Then William said the one thing Meghan had not expected. The instruction did not automatically exclude Harry. His brother could still be considered for future invitations. The words landed hard because they destroyed any idea that this was simply a broad Sussex policy. The future king had drawn a line between husband and wife. That distinction made the betrayal feel deliberate, personal, and irreversible. Meghan stared at him, anger giving way to disbelief. "So he can come, but I cannot?" William answered carefully, saying the restriction concerned her participation, not Harry's status. She understood immediately what that meant. Her husband would someday be forced to choose between entering the room alone or rejecting the monarchy beside her. Meghan left without another argument, but the confrontation had exposed only part of the truth. William had signed off on the ban, yet someone else had allowed his authority to become permanent. And once Meghan discovered who had quietly supported William's authority, the conflict stopped being merely a battle between two people and became a struggle over where royal power actually rested. William's name sat at the center of the controversy, but a state banquet is never controlled by one handwritten instruction alone. Guest lists cross royal households, diplomatic channels, security teams, and the sovereign's approval process. Meghan's next shock came when she understood why no one had stopped the restriction. William had not needed to seize authority from the king. The system had already begun granting the future monarch enough influence to make his judgment extraordinarily difficult to overturn. Charles felt the weight of that system when the final wording reached his desk. Banquet planning inside this royal world moved through the king's household, diplomatic officials, senior palace staff, and the Prince of Wales's office, the team supporting the heir to the throne. That mattered, because William's judgment now carried growing force wherever future royal representation collided with family tension. The prince was no longer speaking only as Harry's brother. He was speaking as the man expected to inherit the crown. Charles removed his glasses and read the clause naming Meghan twice. He set the paper flat and said nothing. The king disliked the permanence of the language, yet he understood why his elder son believed uncertainty had become dangerous. If he overturned the restriction, he could weaken William's authority at the exact moment the future sovereign was being asked to assume more responsibility. If he allowed it to stand, he risked driving Harry further from the family. Camilla entered the discussion quietly, but her warning was direct. She told Charles that reversing the order after Meghan had already learned about it would make the monarchy look divided and leave William publicly exposed. The Queen Consort did not argue that the decision was painless. She argued that undoing it now could create a second crisis, one centered not on Meghan's exclusion, but on whether the king trusted his own heir. Charles faced the choice alone after the conversation ended. He had not created the ban. He had not written the instruction. But when the moment came to cancel it, the monarch declined. His silence gave William's decision something it had not possessed before: the weight of royal acceptance. Meghan would feel that consequence personally, but Harry would feel it differently. For him, the most painful discovery was no longer that William had drawn the line. It was that their father had seen the line, understood its consequences, and chosen not to erase it. That transformed a restriction into a family verdict. Once Harry understood his father had chosen continuity over intervention, the banquet question stopped being about invitations. It became a test of whether he could enter a room without feeling Meghan had been left outside. The fallout did not arrive with palace trumpets or dramatic announcements. It arrived through absence. Harry understood that every future state banquet would now contain an invisible reminder of the family rupture, a place Meghan could never occupy while William's instruction remained in force. The symbolism hit him harder than the protocol. His wife had not merely been denied an invitation. The monarchy had formally imagined its future without her, and his father had allowed that future to stand. Harry received the clarification in language that left almost no room for misunderstanding. Palace planners had begun treating William's instruction as standing guidance, meaning a continuing rule automatically applied whenever future guest lists were prepared. Meghan no longer had to be debated each time. That mattered because state banquets were among the crown's most formal diplomatic occasions, where inclusion signaled trust and royal standing. Her absence was becoming part of the system itself. Harry read the final sentence twice. Then he lowered his phone and looked at Meghan. "They can invite me." She understood immediately. The restriction did not automatically remove her husband, which meant he could someday be welcomed into a royal room from which she was specifically barred. Meghan answered quietly, but without hesitation. "You cannot go under those terms." Harry did not argue. The pain was already written into the choice. Harry felt anger toward William, but disappointment in Charles cut differently. He still wanted some relationship with his father, however damaged and uncertain it had become. Rejecting future invitations could deepen that distance. Accepting one without Meghan, however, would feel like confirming the palace's separation of husband from wife. The prince had been given a door that remained open only if he was willing to walk through it alone. Meghan saw another consequence almost immediately. William had surely understood Harry would refuse to attend without her. If so, the future king had created a policy capable of removing both of them from state banquets while formally excluding only one. The decision placed the visible choice in Harry's hands. If he stayed away, the palace could say he had chosen absence. If he attended, Meghan would be left outside. Harry could no longer accept that ambiguity. He needed to hear from his brother whether this outcome had been accidental or calculated. Meghan knew the answer might hurt him more than the ban itself, but she also knew silence had already done enough damage. The banquet dispute had become a proxy for everything William and Harry could no longer say through official channels, so they finally agreed to meet without wives, courtiers, or palace language standing between them. The turning point did not come in a throne room. It came in a private conversation where neither brother could hide behind staff, statements, or protocol. William arrived prepared to defend the decision. Harry arrived prepared to condemn it. Yet as the meeting unfolded, something unexpected happened. Neither man changed his fundamental position, but both finally admitted what the banquet argument was really about. Meghan had become the boundary line between two incompatible visions of family, duty, and trust. Harry had agreed to meet alone because he wanted one answer without palace language wrapped around it. He needed to know whether the restriction had been designed to protect state occasions or to force him into choosing between royal participation and Meghan. William understood that question could no longer be answered through advisors. A state occasion is a formal royal event tied to diplomacy and national representation, and the prince believed those moments could not carry unresolved family conflict into the room. Harry did not waste time. With no aides present, he looked at his brother and asked, "Did you know I would never go without her?" William paused. The silence lasted long enough to make the answer obvious. Then he said, "Yes." Harry looked away. In that instant, he understood the consequences had not been accidental, even if the motive was more complicated than simple revenge. William admitted the decision would hurt him. He said he hated that part of it, but he no longer trusted major diplomatic events to absorb private disputes without damage. The future king believed every appearance involving Meghan now carried the risk that a seating decision, a briefing, or a perceived slight could become another family crisis. Harry heard the argument and still rejected its logic. To him, excluding his wife did not remove conflict. It institutionalized it. Harry told him exactly that. Every future invitation sent to him alone would feel like a demand to abandon Meghan symbolically for one evening. William could call it protocol, but his brother would experience it as a test of loyalty. That was the moment the conversation shifted. William made one change. He agreed that while Meghan remained excluded, Harry would not receive individual banquet invitations designed to bring him in alone. The ban itself survived, but the repeated choice would not be forced upon him. Harry did not call it reconciliation. William did not call it surrender. Still, both men left with something they had lacked for years: clarity. The private battle had reached its limit, but the moment the decision escaped palace walls, William's attempt to contain a family problem became a worldwide argument about power, loyalty, and exclusion. By morning, a decision designed to operate quietly inside palace machinery had become impossible to hide. The story exploded because the language was absolute. Meghan had not been omitted once; she had been barred indefinitely. Supporters called William decisive. Critics called the order humiliating. But beneath the headlines lay something more uncomfortable. Britain was watching a private family fracture become formal royal architecture, and one image outside Buckingham Palace captured just how deeply the story had landed. The argument spread because this was no ordinary invitation dispute. A standing prohibition is a continuing rule that applies automatically until someone formally changes it, which meant Meghan's name would not need to be reconsidered before every future state banquet. Palace communications refused to enter the personal battle, saying only that attendance at diplomatic events remained subject to royal household discretion. That restraint protected the institution, but it also left the public free to fill the silence with its own conclusions. Outside Buckingham Palace, the tension became impossible to ignore. A small crowd gathered behind the barriers, while broadcasters delivered live updates. One woman lifted a handwritten sign that read, "Family should not become protocol." Just a few feet away, another spectator argued that William had finally done what royal leadership required, and drawn a boundary that could not keep shifting. The same pavement now held two completely different versions of the monarchy's future. The headlines pushed the fracture even further into public view. One fictional morning newspaper ran the words, "The Banquet Ban," across its front page, placing Meghan on one side and William on the other. The image reduced years of pain, mistrust, and royal pressure into a single confrontation. What had begun as an internal decision was now being judged by millions who had never heard the private conversations behind it. Meghan watched part of a television discussion before reaching for the remote. A panel began debating whether her presence belonged anywhere near royal diplomacy, and she switched the screen off before they finished. Harry stayed beside her, angry that strangers were now discussing his marriage as though it were a constitutional problem rather than his life. William watched the same storm from elsewhere and refused advisors' suggestions that he soften the restriction simply to calm the headlines. The prince believed retreating under pressure would make the original decision meaningless and weaken every boundary that followed. And when the noise finally faded, the final consequence was painfully simple. Nobody got everything they wanted, but everyone was forced to reveal what mattered to them most. In the end, there was no dramatic reversal. William did not withdraw the ban. Meghan did not ask for another invitation. Harry did not enter the banquet room without his wife. The confrontation ended not with reconciliation, but with clarity. And that clarity changed the emotional shape of the royal family. William chose the boundary he believed the crown required. Harry chose the marriage he believed needed defending, and Meghan refused to measure her worth by a palace seat. Meghan received the final clarification and read it once. The standing instruction, meaning a continuing palace rule that remains active until it is formally changed, would stay in force. She would not attend future royal state banquets while William's directive governed participation. Harry, however, would no longer receive repeated invitations asking him to enter alone. The choice that had threatened to become a public test at every major occasion had finally been removed. Meghan closed the message without argument. The anger that had carried her through the first confrontation was gone, replaced by something quieter and harder. She told Harry that she no longer wanted her future defined by whether the palace opened or closed a door. He listened, understood what she meant, and decided he would not challenge the arrangement further. Refusing to attend without his wife was no longer rebellion. It was simply where his loyalty rested. William accepted a different cost. He knew the decision might permanently damage his relationship with Harry, and he did not pretend otherwise. The prince believed state occasions demanded clear boundaries, even when those boundaries created personal pain. For the future king, protecting the institution could not depend on preserving the appearance of family unity, when trust underneath it had already broken. Charles felt the loss most painfully. The king understood that neither son had truly won. He also understood something deeper. Ceremonial invitations could never repair wounds that required honesty, forgiveness, and personal trust. His sons had finally stopped using palace events as substitutes for conversations they had avoided for years. The ban became more than a dispute about Meghan. William protected the monarchy according to his judgment. Harry protected his marriage according to his. Meghan stepped outside the exhausting cycle of seeking royal acceptance. No side achieved reconciliation, but the conflict finally reached clarity. And that was the lasting verdict. The empty banquet chair did not represent Meghan's defeat. It represented the moment three people finally stopped pretending that belonging, loyalty, and forgiveness were the same thing. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.